I remember the cold floor before anything else. A sharp chill that shot straight through my knees when the store manager yanked me backward from the doorway and the security guard forced me down as if I were some creature that had wandered in by mistake. The overhead lights were too bright, exposing every stain on my sleeves and every smear of dirt from the street, making me feel smaller with every second that passed. My stomach had been aching for hours, and the scent of warm bread from the counter was the reason I had stepped inside in the first place, hoping the clerk would allow me to buy something cheap with the loose coins I had managed to collect throughout the day. But the moment I moved toward the exit, the manager's voice cracked through the room like lightning. She stole the sandwich. "Call the cops!" The words ricocheted around the store, bouncing off shelves lined with snacks and refrigerated drinks until they landed on me with the weight of a sentence I had not earned. Before I could even process what was happening, the guard grabbed my wrists and twisted them behind my back in a sharp motion that forced me down onto the tile. "Stop resisting," he barked, though I had not resisted at all. I could barely lift my head. I managed to whisper that I had not taken anything, but my voice trembled with exhaustion, and no one believed me. A woman with a basket pressed against her chest stared at me with open disgust as she muttered, "These homeless people are all the same." Another man shook his head as if I were an inconvenience ruining his quiet errand. Shame spread through my chest like fire as I knelt there, my palms flat against the icy floor, trembling. When the guard reached for his radio, I felt my breath catch. The mention of police was enough to send panic surging through my veins. Memories I had tried so hard to bury clawed their way back to the surface. Memories of the scandal that destroyed my name 3 years ago. Memories of headlines that called me a thief. Memories of the betrayal that pushed me onto the streets with nothing but the clothes on my back. I could not let the police get involved again. "Please," I whispered, my throat tight. I did not steal anything, but my words dissolved in the stale air of the store. The manager stood above me, gripping the sandwich like it was proof of my guilt, his face red with anger. "She thought she could walk out with it," he snapped. "The police can handle her." The guard pressed the button on his radio. My pulse hammered so hard it hurt. Not again. Not another accusation. Not another moment of being judged by strangers who did not know anything about me. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the sound of sirens and the weight of more humiliation. But then a small voice cut through the chaos. "She did not steal anything." Everything stopped. The guard froze with the radio still in his hand. The manager turned, the shoppers shifted, and through the gap in the crowd stepped a little girl no older than 5, with curls bouncing around her cheeks and a sandwich clutched tightly in her mitten-covered hands. She walked right toward me without fear, her tiny boots tapping against the tile. She held up the sandwich like it was a shield. "I bought this one for her, with my allowance." Her voice was soft but steady, filled with a certainty that made the adults around her seem suddenly unsure. The manager's anger flickered. The guard loosened his grip on my wrists. Someone in the back of the store coughed awkwardly as a few people looked away, embarrassed. Before I could understand what was happening, a man rushed forward, tall and slightly out of breath. "Daddy," the little girl said, smiling up at him. His expression changed instantly, shifting from frantic worry to protective tension as he placed himself between us. "Are you all right, June?" He knelt down to her level, checking her hands and brushing her hair back gently. When she nodded, he turned to me with suspicion carved deep into his features. It was a look I had seen many times before. The look people gave someone they believed was dangerous simply because they looked broken. I lowered my gaze, humiliation twisting inside me. I did not want his misunderstanding to frighten the child, but I did not know how to explain anything without sounding like a liar. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My throat felt too tight. The little girl, however, stepped forward again before her father could stop her. She looked at me with an innocence so pure it made my chest ache. She studied my torn sleeves, my shaking hands, and the exhaustion painted across my face. Then she spoke in a clear voice that carried through the entire store. "You need a home, and I need a mommy." Silence swept across the room like a blanket. The guard stared. The manager blinked. The father stiffened as if he had been struck. I could only stare at her stunned, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and a pain so sharp it felt like a gasp. No one had said the word mommy to me in years, not since before everything fell apart. And now, hearing it from a child who did not know me at all made something inside me tremble uncontrollably. I did not understand why she said it. I did not know why she saw something in me that the world had long decided was worthless. All I knew was that the moment those words left her lips, something shifted inside me, something fragile and aching, but still alive. I had no idea then, kneeling on the cold tile of that convenience store, that her words were the beginning of everything that would come next. But that night, with strangers staring and humiliation burning through me, a little girl offered me something I thought I had lost forever, a chance to matter again. I left the store the moment they released me, my legs still shaking from the humiliation, my face burning with heat even though the cold outside wrapped around me like a sheet of ice. The automatic doors slid open and a blast of wind hit me so hard I staggered. Snow drifted sideways across the parking lot, whipping in white streaks beneath the streetlights. My breath came out in sharp clouds, and for a moment I could not tell if the trembling in my chest came from the freezing air or from the echo of the little girl's voice still ringing inside my mind. "You need a home, and I need a mommy." I wished desperately that I could forget she had said it, that I could pretend her words had not pierced through every wall I had built to survive. But the sentence clung to me the way snow clings to eyelashes impossible to shake away. I pulled my coat tighter around myself. The zipper was broken. I had been meaning to fix it for weeks, but thread and needles are not easy to come by when every dollar you find needs to go toward food. I walked faster, trying to put distance between myself and the store. I hoped the girl and her father had left through a different exit and would not see me stumbling down the sidewalk like a wounded animal. I did not want her to remember me like this, not with her bright eyes and innocent kindness, not covered in shame. But fate never seems to respect the spaces we try to keep. Halfway down the block, a wave of dizziness washed through me. My vision wavered. I blinked hard and kept moving, forcing my legs to stay steady. The snowstorm was worsening by the minute. The wind bit into my cheeks and sliced through the holes in my gloves. My stomach cramped violently, reminding me that the last time I had eaten anything substantial had been almost 2 days earlier. I quickened my pace. If I could just make it to the bus shelter at the corner, maybe I could sit down long enough for the world to stop spinning. My boots slipped on the icy pavement as I approached the shelter. The bench was cold, but at least it was something solid to lean against. I gripped the metal frame and lowered myself carefully. But the moment I sat, a wave of weakness rolled through my entire body. The world tilted. My ears buzzed, muffling the sounds around me until all I could hear was the rush of my own heartbeat. I tried to take a deep breath, but my chest seized with a sharp ache. My vision blurred again. I blinked once, blinked twice. The snow looked like white noise around me, like static filling the air. I had passed out before in the worst months after everything fell apart, but the terror never became familiar. There was always a moment right before my body gave in when I feared I might never wake again. "I will be fine," I whispered to myself, but the words barely made it past my lips. I braced my hand against the bench, trying to stand, but my knees buckled before I could lift my weight. My legs folded beneath me. The ground came up fast. I hit the snow hard, the cold seeping instantly through my clothes. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw movement down the sidewalk. A tall figure, a small shape beside him. But the world tilted again, and the shapes blurred until they became nothing more than shadows drifting through white. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe my mind was still replaying the image of the little girl from the store. I let my eyes fall shut, too exhausted to fight anymore. A moment later, I felt the ground shift beneath my cheek. Snowflakes melted against my skin. My breathing became shallow. Somewhere far away, I heard a voice. "Hey, hey, can you hear me?" The voice was deep and rough, filled with urgency. I tried to respond, but my lips barely moved. A hand touched my shoulder, firm and warm, even through my coat. A second voice trembled, a small one I recognized instantly. "Daddy." She is not moving. I wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to tell her I was all right. but my body refused. Everything felt heavy. I sensed movement around me, felt myself being lifted from the ground. The arms that held me were strong and tense, and though I could not see his face, I knew exactly who it was. The father who had looked at me with suspicion. The father who had pulled his daughter behind him like a shield. The father of the child who had spoken words that still echoed in my chest. "Hold on," he said. "Just hold on." His voice shook slightly as he adjusted his grip beneath my shoulders. "You are freezing." My head rested weakly against his shoulder as he carried me toward the street. Through my fading awareness, I heard the little girl's voice again. "Daddy, hurry. Please." There was fear in her tone now, a fear that reached past my exhaustion and tugged at something deep within me. I wanted to reassure her. I wanted to tell her she did nothing wrong, but speaking felt impossible. The man paused, shifting my weight again. I heard him trying to make a call, then muttering something under his breath. "The urgent care is closed. The shelter is full." He cursed softly, frustration tightening his voice. Snow piled on my lashes as another gust of wind hit us. "All right, I am taking her with us." His decision came out in one firm breath, as if he hated the idea but hated the alternative more. He carried me across the street, his footsteps crunching through layers of packed snow. The little girl followed close behind her boots, making smaller, quicker sounds. I drifted in and out of consciousness as he guided me up a set of steps. The front door opened. Warm air brushed against my face. It smelled like pine wood and something faintly sweet, maybe vanilla. I heard the little girl whisper, "Daddy, is she going to die?" He answered in a low voice, not meant for me to hear. "I hope not." They eased me onto something soft, maybe a sofa. A blanket was draped over me. My breathing steadied just enough for my eyes to flutter open for a brief second. The last thing I saw before darkness took over again was the little girl kneeling beside me, her tiny hand resting gently on mine. "Will she be safe here?" I heard her whisper. Her father took a long breath before answering. "I do not know, but we have to try." Then everything went quiet. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I noticed was warmth. Not the sharp, fleeting kind that comes from standing too close to a heating vent on a freezing night, but a deep, steady warmth that wrapped around me like a soft cocoon. It took my mind a moment to understand that the pain in my fingers and toes had lessened, that the trembling beneath my skin had slowed, and that the cold I had grown used to for months was no longer pressing against me from every direction. My vision sharpened gradually as I blinked several times, trying to remember where I was and how I had gotten there. A ceiling fan spun slowly above me, its blades creating a soft, rhythmic whisper in the air. The room smelled faintly of pine, like a log cabin in winter, and underneath that was a gentle sweetness I could not place at first. Vanilla, maybe, or something warm cooking in a nearby kitchen. I was lying on a long sofa covered in a wool blanket that felt far too nice to belong to someone like me. My coat, torn and dirty along the sleeves, had been folded neatly on the armrest. For a second, panic fluttered in my chest. I was not used to waking up in comfortable places. The shelter of the street becomes familiar after enough nights familiar in its cruelty and routine. But this was different. This was a home. I pushed myself up slightly, wincing as a dull ache rippled through my body. I expected to be alone, but then I heard a soft scratching sound. I turned my head and saw her. The little girl from the store. June. She sat cross-legged on a thick rug, leaning over a sheet of paper, her tongue poking out in concentration as she colored with fierce focus. Her tiny boots were off, replaced with fuzzy socks patterned with tiny stars. Her curls fell gently around her shoulders, catching the amber glow of the fireplace crackling nearby. She did not notice me at first. I watched her draw lines of bright blue and green, then switch to yellow. It took me a moment to understand what she was drawing. 3 figures, one tall, one small, and the one in the middle had hair that looked eerily like mine. Long, tangled, gold-toned. My throat tightened. She had written something above the drawing in big, uneven letters. "My home." The words blurred as my eyes stung with sudden emotion. I pressed my lips together, trying to steady my breathing, unsure what to feel. I shifted on the sofa and let out a small groan without meaning to. The sound must have been louder than I thought because June's head snapped up. Her eyes widened and a bright smile burst across her face. "You are awake!" She jumped up from the rug and hurried to my side, holding her drawing proudly in front of her as if it were a priceless painting. "Look, I made this for you." I tried to smile, though my chest ached with 1,000 different feelings. No one had made anything for me in years, not since before the scandal, not since before everything was ripped away. "It is beautiful," I whispered, my voice still raspy from the cold. She nodded with great seriousness. "Daddy says you can stay until you are better, but I think you should stay longer." Her confidence startled me. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could form a word, footsteps echoed down the hallway. June turned and beamed. "Daddy!" Daniel appeared at the entryway to the living room, his expression unreadable, his posture stiff in a way that told me he was trying to hide how unsure he felt. He wore a thick sweater and dark jeans, his hair still damp as if he had recently come in from outside, or maybe washed the snow from his hair after carrying me. He looked at June first, then at me. His gaze lingered just long enough to reveal a flicker of concern before he masked it under a more cautious expression. He approached slowly, placing a glass of water and a small bowl of soup on the coffee table. "You passed out in the snow," he said in a measured tone. His voice was calm but carried undertones of something heavier. "I did not have a choice. You needed help. When you are better, you can rest a little and then leave." The words stung more than I expected. He did not say them cruelly. He said them like a man who had been forced into a difficult decision, one he was still not sure about. "Thank you," I whispered, lowering my gaze so he would not see the hurt flash across my face. June remained at my side, clearly wanting to stay with me, but Daniel gently touched her shoulder. "Give her space. Let her rest." She frowned, but obeyed, though her eyes darted back toward me repeatedly as if afraid I might disappear the moment she looked away. The rest of the day passed quietly. I slept on and off, drifting in and out of dreams that felt too heavy. Each time I opened my eyes, I saw the room's warm glow, heard the distant clatter of Daniel cooking in the kitchen, or the soft hum of June singing to herself in the hallway. But when dinner came, I insisted on sitting at the breakfast bar instead of joining them at the table. I ate slowly, careful not to ask for anything more than what had been offered. Daniel watched me only when he thought I was not paying attention. June chattered about school, about gingerbread houses, and her teacher about how she wanted to build a snow bakery in the backyard. Her innocence was a bright light in the shadows that had settled inside me. I avoided Daniel's eyes whenever he glanced my way. At one point, as I reached for a tray of cups to help clear the dishes, the sleeve of the borrowed sweater I wore slid down my arm. I felt the cold air hit the old scar on my wrist before I saw Daniel's gaze fall directly on it. A long, raised mark, pale and jagged from a wound that had healed badly when I was too scared to seek medical help. He said nothing, but the moment stretched between us heavy and unspoken. Eventually he turned away, but the look on his face lingered in my mind long after the kitchen grew quiet. Later that night, when the house settled into stillness, I lay awake on the sofa beneath the blanket he had draped over me. My eyes traced the flickering shadows on the ceiling as I listened to the soft crackle of the dying fire. I wondered what Daniel truly saw when he looked at me. A burden, a mistake, a stranger he had rescued out of obligation, or something else entirely. I did not have an answer. All I knew was that as sleep finally pulled me under, June's drawing lay on the coffee table and the words she had written echoed softly in my mind. My home. The next morning arrived in a quiet blur of soft light slipping through the curtains. I woke to the faint crackle of the fireplace and the distant sound of running water somewhere in the house. My body still felt heavy, but the feverish heat from the night before had eased into something more tolerable. I pushed the blanket aside slowly and sat up, taking a moment to breathe in the warmth that surrounded me. The air smelled faintly of pine and something citrusy, like the remnants of a cleaner someone had used earlier that morning. I folded the blanket carefully, unsure if I was allowed to move around the house, but too restless to stay on the sofa. As I stood, a small wave of dizziness washed over me. I steadied myself with a hand on the armrest. I felt fragile the way a cracked piece of porcelain might feel if someone touched it too quickly. I slipped my coat back on more out of habit than necessity. The fabric was stiff and torn in too many places to offer much comfort, but wearing it felt like a layer of protection I was afraid to remove. I had been judged by too many people in the past while wearing it, and judged by even more when I dared to take it off. I stepped quietly into the hallway, drawn by the faint sounds coming from the kitchen. The house felt peaceful in a way I had not felt in years. The hardwood floors creaked softly beneath my feet as I moved toward the doorway, careful not to disturb anything. When I reached the kitchen entrance, I paused. June sat on a stool at the counter, her tiny legs swinging as she concentrated on spreading jam across a slice of toast. Her curls were slightly messy, as if she had rushed out of bed without brushing her hair. Daniel stood at the stove, gently stirring something in a small pot. They looked like a picture drawn from a life I had once dreamed of. Warm, simple, safe. I stayed in the doorway, unsure whether I belonged in the scene or should slip back to the sofa. June spotted me first. She lifted her head and smiled wide. "You are awake." I managed a small smile. "Yes, feeling a little better." Daniel turned slightly, giving me a brief nod. "Morning." His voice was polite, careful, as if he were measuring each word before speaking it. I took a few steps into the kitchen. The heat from the stove warmed my face. Without thinking, I reached for the glass of water on the counter. As I did, the sleeve of my coat slipped down just enough to expose the edge of the scar on my wrist. Old, pale, jagged, pale. A reminder of the night that had carved itself into my memory. I froze. The scar was something I usually hid beneath long sleeves and folded arms, something I never let anyone see unless I had no choice. I tried to pull the coat back up quickly, but not fast enough. Daniel had already seen it. His stirring slowed. His eyes dropped to my wrist, and for a moment, the whole room fell still. I felt exposed in a way the cold had never managed to make me feel. There was no way to explain the scar without unraveling memories I had spent years trying to bury. Memories of a night filled with betrayal and despair, a night when I had been pushed so far into the corner of my own life that I thought disappearing would be the only mercy left. I looked away, heat rising in my cheeks, even though shame was colder than the snow outside. The silence stretched too long. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was low. "Are you all right?" I swallowed. "Yes. It is old." His eyes stayed on me for a moment and softened, but not entirely. There was still uncertainty there, still caution, still the weight of questions he had no right to ask and yet could not help wondering about. June hopped off her stool and tugged at her father's shirt. "Daddy can. She helped me spread the jam." I exhaled quietly, grateful for the distraction. Daniel hesitated but nodded. "She can help." June grabbed my hand without hesitation, her fingers warm and small in mine. She guided me to the stool beside her and pushed the plate of toast toward me. I sat down slowly. My hands still trembled slightly from weakness, but I steadied them as best I could. June scooted closer, watching me with wide curiosity, as if waiting for me to perform a magic trick. "Do you like strawberry jam?" I nodded. "Very much." She grinned proudly. "I like it too. Daddy buys the good kind." Daniel turned away, pretending to busy himself with the pot on the stove, but I saw the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth as if he was fighting a smile. I spread the jam carefully, feeling oddly self-conscious under the watchful eyes of the child beside me. When I handed her the toast, she accepted it like a precious gift. She bit into it and nodded with satisfaction. "It is perfect. Thank you." Her simple praise hit deeper than she could ever understand. "You are welcome," I said softly. After breakfast, Daniel stepped away to change clothes for work. June followed him, humming a little song about snowflakes and gingerbread. I stayed at the counter, tracing the edge of the empty plate with my fingertips. For a moment, the kitchen felt too quiet. When Daniel returned, his jacket was slung over one arm. He paused in front of me. "You can rest here today. The storm is worse than last night." I nodded, unsure what to say. The gratitude in my chest felt too big for words. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say more, then closed it again. His eyes drifted briefly to my wrist before lifting to meet mine. "If you need anything, just let me know." "I will. Thank you." He walked out with June bundled in her coat, lifting her into his arms as the wind howled against the door behind them. I stood alone in the kitchen, the warmth of the morning still lingering around me like a fragile echo. As I looked down at my hands, June's jam-smeared toast crumbs still clinging to my fingertips, I touched the edge of my scar gently. For the first time in years, the memory behind it did not feel like a sentence. It felt like something I might one day be able to speak aloud. Someone had seen the scar and had not turned away in disgust. And that small kindness made something shift inside me quietly and carefully, like the first crack of thawing ice. The house felt strangely quiet after Daniel left for work. I sat alone at the kitchen counter for several minutes, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the low whisper of the wind slipping past the windows. The warmth of the morning still clung to the air, but without Daniel and June there. The silence pressed in around me like a reminder that I was only here temporarily, a guest who did not know where to place her hands or how to breathe without feeling out of place. I stood slowly and began clearing the breakfast dishes more out of instinct than intention. The plates were simple and white, the kind of plates used in homes where meals are shared at a table instead of eaten on a sidewalk bench or from a cardboard box. I rinsed them carefully, avoiding any sudden motions in case something slipped and shattered. I did not want to break anything in this house, not even a plate. Especially not a plate. I ran warm water over my hands and felt a small ache in my chest. It had been so long since I had stood in a kitchen like this doing something as simple and ordinary as washing dishes without fear of being told I was in the way. When the last plate was set on the rack, I turned toward the living room. The fireplace had cooled, but soft embers still glowed faintly beneath the logs. June's drawing lay on the coffee table exactly where she had left it the night before. I walked over and picked it up gently. The stick figures she had drawn were crude, uneven, and far from realistic, but I stared at them as if they were the most exquisite work of art I had ever seen. My home. I mouthed the words silently. They felt too big for my heart, too generous, too undeserved. I placed the drawing back down and wrapped my arms around myself as if that could somehow hold together the emotions threatening to spill out. The hours passed slowly. I tried to rest, but my thoughts kept circling in loops, each one returning to the same impossible question. Why did June see me that way? Why did she believe I belonged beside her, between her and her father? I had no answers. I only knew what the world had taught me over the past 3 years, which was that people like me did not belong in homes like this. People like me were cautionary tales, reminders of how quickly life could turn cruel. Sometime in the early afternoon, the front door opened. I jumped slightly at the sound, my mind still slow from exhaustion. Daniel stepped inside, carrying 2 large grocery bags. Snow dusted the shoulders of his coat. He looked surprised when he saw me standing in the living room instead of resting on the sofa. "You are awake." I nodded. "I wanted to help with the dishes. I hope that is all right." "It is fine," he said, though his tone was more restrained than warm. He set the bags on the kitchen counter. I hesitated near the doorway. "Can I help with those?" He paused, considering, then nodded once. "If you would like." I walked over and began emptying the first bag. He had bought fresh vegetables, bread milk, and a small container of honey, a few boxes of macaroni and cheese, likely for June. I placed everything neatly in the refrigerator or cabinet, moving slowly so I would not make a mistake. Daniel watched me with a quiet curiosity, as if trying to understand why I insisted on helping instead of resting. "You do not have to do that," he said. "You are recovering." "I know, but it makes me feel like I am contributing something." My voice felt thin, but it was true. I hated the feeling of being a burden more than anything. His expression shifted, slightly softening, before he caught himself and returned to a more neutral stance. When the last of the groceries were put away, I found myself lingering near the stove, unsure where to place my hands. Daniel reached for a mug in the cabinet. "June likes tea after school." I nodded, unsure if he was explaining or simply thinking aloud. I glanced toward the window. The afternoon light was gentle, casting a soft glow over the kitchen. It made everything look warmer than I felt. "Do you cook often?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "Enough to get by. My wife used to cook." His voice thinned unexpectedly, as if the memory caught him off guard. He shifted his weight and opened the refrigerator door. I realized too late that I should not have asked. "I am sorry," I said quickly. "I did not mean to pry." "It is fine." His tone made it clear that the subject was closed. I stepped back, giving him space. He took out a container of leftover vegetables and placed it on the counter. "I have to pick up June soon. You can rest on the sofa." I nodded, but instead of lying down, I reached for the vegetables. "May I?" He hesitated. "What do you mean? May I make something for dinner I can cook?" His eyebrows lifted as if the idea surprised him. He studied my face for a long moment. A mixture of uncertainty and a flicker of hope passed through his eyes. "You do not have to." "I know, but I want to." He gave a slow nod. "All right." I watched him leave the kitchen, gathering his keys and stepping out into the cold once more. When the door closed behind him, I exhaled slowly. Cooking had once been a comfort to me, a way to create something warm and gentle in a world that so often felt harsh. I rolled up the sleeves of the sweater he had given me and began chopping the vegetables with the careful rhythm I had learned years ago. I found rosemary in a small glass jar in one of the cabinets and added it to the pot. Its scent rose into the air, filling the kitchen with a familiar warmth. When the soup began to simmer, the fragrance deepened. Sweet, earthy, comforting. Something inside me eased for the first time in weeks. I had almost forgotten the simple pleasure of working in a real kitchen. The door opened again sooner than I expected. Daniel stepped inside with June on his hip, both of them dusted in snow. June spotted the pot bubbling on the stove and gasped. "Are you cooking?" She wriggled out of her father's arms and ran toward the counter. "It smells like Mommy's soup." The words struck Daniel like a physical blow. His face shifted, and for a moment he looked at me differently, as if the scent rising from the pot had transported him into a memory he had not prepared to revisit. I froze, unsure whether to apologize for accidentally stepping on something sacred. "I should not have added the rosemary," I murmured. Daniel stared at me, caught between two emotions I could not decipher. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "No, it is fine." His eyes drifted to the pot again. "It has been a long time since this house smelled like that." I lowered my gaze, my hands tightening on the edge of the counter. I knew then that I had stepped into a part of their lives without meaning to. A part filled with love loss and shadows I did not yet understand. And I sensed, even without looking up, that something had shifted in Daniel. Not trust, not yet, but something fragile and uncertain that neither of us knew how to name. I slept poorly that night, not because the sofa was uncomfortable or because the house made unfamiliar noises. It was my mind that refused to quiet. Thoughts crowded together like anxious birds, flapping and restless, each one demanding attention. The scent of the rosemary soup still lingered faintly in the air, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the expression on Daniel's face when he tasted the broth. Surprise, pain, memory, grief. Something in that moment had cracked open between us, but I did not know what it meant or whether it should have happened at all. And underneath all of that, beneath the warmth and the shared meal and the flicker of something almost gentle, lived the fear that had followed me for years. The fear of being exposed, the fear of being seen for the wrong thing again. I lay awake staring at the shadows until the house grew silent and still. It was sometime after midnight when a low groan echoed softly from across the living room. I jolted upright, my pulse quickening. At first, I thought it had come from outside from the wind pressing against the walls. But then, I heard it again. A soft, muffled sound, pained and fragile. I turned toward the narrow hallway that led to Daniel's room, but the noise did not come from there. It came from the far end of the living room, from the direction of the guest room where I kept my things. I stood slowly, my legs stiff and unsteady as I approached the doorway. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the porch light seeping through the blinds. The little folding cot Daniel had set up for me earlier was empty. My stomach dropped. I stepped inside the room, scanning the shadows. At first, I saw nothing. Then I heard the groan again, slightly louder this time. It came from the floor beside the small dresser. I hurried across the room and sank to my knees. There she was, me, curled into myself, shaking my forehead slick with sweat. For a moment, I did not understand what I was seeing. It felt like looking at a stranger. My body was folded tightly, my knees pulled up to my chest, my arm tucked beneath my head. My breath came in shallow, quick gasps. I touched my forehead and felt the heat rising like fire. Fever, a strong one. Too strong. My vision blurred, my thoughts tangled, and before I could push myself up again, the room spun and my body collapsed back onto the hardwood floor. I do not know how long I lay there before I heard footsteps. They were soft at first, then faster. The door opened and Daniel appeared in the dim light. His face registered alarm and confusion almost instantly. He hurried toward me and crouched down. "Can you hear me?" His voice was firm but gentle. I tried to open my mouth to respond, but the words stuck. My throat felt scraped raw. He pressed his palm lightly against my forehead. The concern in his eyes deepened. "You are burning up. We need help." I shook my head weakly, fear spiking through me. "Please, no hospital. Please." The words came out barely audible. Understanding flickered across his face, followed by something else. Something complicated. "You need a doctor," he said. "Not a hospital. I promise." I closed my eyes, tears burning behind my lids. I wanted to explain why the idea terrified me, why the thought of being admitted somewhere made my entire body seize with panic. But I did not have the strength. I felt his hand on my shoulder as he stood. "Stay awake. I will be back." His footsteps retreated down the hall, then down the stairs. After that, everything blurred. I slipped in and out of consciousness, drifting between patches of awareness. At one point, I heard June's voice, frightened and soft, asking what was wrong. At another, I heard a deeper voice, unfamiliar, calm, and steady. When I opened my eyes again, an older man sat beside me dressed in a dark coat with a stethoscope around his neck. He checked my pulse, felt the heat on my forehead, examined the trembling in my hands. "Dehydration. Fever is high. She is underweight for her frame. Has she eaten regularly?" Daniel hesitated. "Not sure." The doctor nodded as if he had expected that answer. He glanced down at my wrist where the scar peeked out from beneath the blanket. His eyes softened. "Any next of kin we should notify?" he asked. "Anyone who needs to know about her condition." The words pierced me with a pain sharper than fever. I forced my eyes open enough to whisper, "No one. There is no one who needs to know if I am alive or not." The sentence fractured something inside me as soon as I said it. It felt too true, too bare, too final. The doctor did not ask anything else. He simply nodded and continued his work with a quiet respect that made me feel both seen and unbearably exposed. He left instructions for Daniel, handed him a small bag of supplies, and disappeared into the snowy night. When the door closed behind him, the house felt impossibly still. Daniel crouched beside me again, the lines of worry still carved into his face. I wanted to speak to thank him, to explain, to apologize for being more trouble than he had ever asked for, but my strength was gone. Instead, I watched him through heavy eyelids. He stayed there for a long moment, watching me breathe as if making sure the rise and fall of my chest did not stop. His expression was unreadable, a mix of duty and something else I could not define. Maybe pity. Maybe worry. Maybe the beginning of trust. I could not tell. Eventually, he stood pulling the blanket up around my shoulders. "Get some rest. You are safe here." His voice softened on the final word. Safe. It had been so long since I had heard it spoken to me, and even longer since I had believed it. I let the warmth of the blanket settle over me and allowed myself to surrender to sleep. As the room faded into darkness, the last thing I felt was the gentle comfort of not being alone. When morning came, the light in the guest room was softer than I expected. A muted gold glowed through the blinds, bright enough to let me know it was daylight, but gentle enough not to sting my eyes. My fever had broken sometime during the night, leaving a thin layer of exhaustion clinging to every muscle in my body. My limbs felt heavy, weighed down by both the remnants of illness and the emotions that had pulled at me like undertow in the dark. I pushed myself up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in my back. The blanket fell from my shoulders and the room settled into focus. Someone had placed a glass of water beside the cot, along with 2 small bottles of medication left by the doctor. I took a sip, the coldness soothing my throat. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel grateful. Not because I believed I deserved this kindness, but because being treated like a human rather than a problem was something I had not felt in a very long time. I stood carefully testing my balance, then stepped into the hallway. The house was unusually quiet. No sounds of breakfast dishes clinking, no soft thud of June's feet padding across the floor, no low murmur of Daniel's voice. A strange ache settled in my chest at the stillness. I made my way to the kitchen where a note sat on the counter. The handwriting was neat, a little stiff, unmistakably Daniel's. Took June to school. I will be back. Rest. There were no extra words, no unnecessary concerns, but the simplicity of the message felt strangely grounding. I sat at the counter for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me. The scent of the pine lingering in the air mixed with something gentler, maybe cinnamon from the tea I had seen Daniel make the day before. It felt like a home. Not mine, but a home nonetheless. I moved slowly through the house, tidying small things, wiping crumbs from the counter, folding the blanket on the sofa more neatly. I did not want to intrude, but I also did not want to sit idle, letting the weight of uncertainty crush me. The hours blurred together until I heard the front door open. I turned just in time to see June run inside her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. When she spotted me, her face lit up with a brightness so pure it made my throat tighten. "You are not gone." She ran toward me, stopping just short of my legs as if waiting for permission before hugging me. I smiled and knelt down. "I am still here. For now." She threw her arms around my neck with a small sigh of relief. Her curls brushed my cheek, carrying the faint scent of crayons and winter air. Daniel stepped inside a moment later, closing the door gently behind him. He watched us quietly, his expression unreadable but softer than it had been before. June pulled away and reached into her backpack. "I made something for you." She unzipped the pouch and pulled out a small knitted scarf, uneven and full of loose stitches. Little flecks of lint clung to the yarn. The colors did not match, and a few edges curled upward awkwardly, but to me it was beautiful. I took it carefully, afraid I might tear the fragile stitches. "Did you make this yourself?" She nodded, puffing up with pride. "Yes." "So you will not be cold, and so you will not be alone." The second part of her sentence nearly undid me. I blinked quickly, trying to steady the sudden rush of emotion. "Thank you, June. Truly." Daniel watched us for a moment before clearing his throat. "How are you feeling?" I straightened, clutching the scarf gently. "Better. Thank you." He nodded, but the flicker of something hesitant in his eyes told me he was not completely convinced. He stepped past me and set down the grocery bag he had brought in. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing I was still relying on someone who owed me nothing. I was about to offer help when June tugged at my hand again. "Will you stay with us today?" Her question hung in the air. Daniel paused, his hand hovering over the fridge handle. He looked at me and I met his gaze, unsure what answer he wanted me to give. "If you need to rest," he said, "you can stay." He sounded careful, almost guarded, but his words carried a quiet allowance that eased some of my tension. I nodded slowly. "All right, I will stay." June cheered and pulled me toward the living room. As she showed me her drawings from school, Daniel remained in the kitchen unpacking groceries. I felt his eyes drift toward me occasionally, not with suspicion this time, but with something more complicated, something undecided, something cautious but no longer cold. As the afternoon passed, I felt a shift in the atmosphere of the house, not dramatic, not spoken, but subtle, like a draft that no longer sneaks under the door, or the way a room feels warmer when someone chooses not to close themselves off. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls with golden light, I helped June sort her crayons into a small wooden box. She leaned against me as she worked, humming softly. She seemed content, unbothered by the fragility of the moment, unafraid of how temporary my presence truly was. She simply existed near me, trusting me without question, without hesitation. Trust was a foreign language to me now, but somehow she spoke it fluently. At one point, she looked up and said, "You smell nice today. Like the soup." I laughed quietly, surprised by how natural it felt. "I suppose that is a good thing." She nodded earnestly. "Mommy used to make soup." I paused, the air catching in my lungs. I had known the topic would surface eventually. I had felt its shadow in the house even before anyone spoke it aloud. But hearing her say it so casually with so much love and so little sorrow made something in me ache. Daniel appeared in the doorway at that moment holding a dish towel. His eyes met mine for a long second before he looked away. The silence felt heavy but not unbearable. Not anymore. When evening settled in, I offered to help prepare dinner again. This time, Daniel did not hesitate. His acceptance came quietly with a small nod that warmed something inside me. As I chopped vegetables, I sensed him watching from the corner of his eye, observing, measuring. Not judging, at least not in the same way as before. Just watching. The house felt different now. Slightly. Softly. As if something fragile had begun to grow in the spaces between us. Not trust. Not yet. But the earliest shape of it. And as the soup simmered again on the stove, filling the kitchen with rosemary and warmth, I felt for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, I was not a ghost in someone else's life. I was present, I was seen, and though the night ahead would bring its own trials for that brief slice of evening, I let myself breathe easier. It happened on the coldest night of the storm, the kind of cold that feels alive, moving through the air like a creature searching for its next breath to steal. The wind howled against the windows, rattling them in their frames. Even inside the house, wrapped in warmth and soft light, I felt the weight of the winter pressing down. After dinner, I had helped clean the kitchen and then settled on the sofa while Daniel read a book beside the fireplace. June had fallen asleep early, curled in a small lump of blankets on the armchair. Her little breaths were deep and steady, the kind that come from children who trust the world enough to sleep without fear. I watched her for a long time, marveling at how delicate she looked. It amazed me how children could carry so much light inside them, as if the world could not dim it no matter how dark things became. At some point, my eyelids grew heavy. I must have drifted off for a few minutes. When I opened my eyes again, Daniel was gone. The fire had softened into a slow glow, and the house felt strangely still. I sat up, adjusting the blanket draped over my legs. That was when I noticed the empty armchair. The blankets that had covered June were piled neatly as if she had placed them aside. The room was too quiet. I stood quickly and moved toward the hallway. Daniel, maybe, he had taken her to her room, but when I peeked inside, the bed was empty. The little lamp that usually glowed beside her stuffed animals was dark. A chill tightened around my spine. I called out again louder this time, "Daniel." There was no answer. Panic surged through me. I hurried back to the living room and checked the front door. My breath caught in my throat. It was open. Not wide, but cracked just enough for a sliver of icy wind to slip inside. Snowflakes drifted onto the mat, tiny white crystals melting into droplets. I stepped outside without a coat, the brutal cold biting instantly into my skin. The neighborhood was blanketed in thick snow, the street lamps casting long, pale beams into the storm. My eyes scanned the yard, the sidewalk, the driveway. Nothing. But in the distance, faint footprints dotted the snow. Small footprints. June. My heart slammed against my ribs. I did not think. I ran back inside, slipped on my boots with shaking hands, grabbed my coat, and rushed back out into the storm. The wind hit me like a slap. The cold cut deep. But none of that mattered. Not while a 5-year-old girl was outside in the night chasing something she should never have gone after alone. I followed the footprints carefully, fighting the urge to run too fast and lose the trail. They wandered down the sidewalk, dipping slightly toward the edge of the road. The snow made everything slippery. Several times I nearly lost my footing, catching myself on nearby fences or mailboxes. My breath came out in harsh clouds, but I kept moving. A block away, I saw a small figure ahead, a little body trudging forward through the snow, too small to fight against the wind. June. June. Stop. My voice cracked through the storm. She stumbled but did not turn around. I pushed forward faster. When I finally reached her, she had fallen to her knees, her gloved hands pressing into the snow. Her shoulders shook as she tried to stand again. I dropped beside her and wrapped my arms around her. "June, sweet girl, what are you doing out here?" She looked up at me through tears that glistened in the icy air. "I wanted to find you. You left before." I thought you might leave again." Her voice trembled so softly it barely rose above the wind. The guilt hit me like lightning. I brushed her hair from her forehead. "I am here. I am here now. You are safe." But she was shivering violently. Her little hand slipped from her glove. When it landed on the snow, I saw the redness blooming across her palm where the skin had scraped open. The wound was small but bleeding, staining the snow a faint pink. I lifted her glove and wrapped my scarf around her hand as carefully as I could. "Hold still. We need to stop the bleeding." She whimpered, but nodded, her eyes wide with fear and cold. As I tied the scarf gently around her palm, something in me cracked open. Something protective and fierce. Something I had not felt since before the world had turned against me. I pulled her close, trying to shield her from the wind. Just then, I heard fast footsteps behind us. I turned to see Daniel running toward us, his face pale with fear, snow covering his hair and shoulders. "June!" His voice broke when he saw her. He dropped to his knees beside us, gathering her carefully into his arms. "Are you hurt? Let me see your hand." She showed him the bleeding palm wrapped in my scarf. He exhaled shakily, relief washing over his face. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Not like a stranger, not like a threat, but like someone who mattered, someone who had protected the thing he loved most. "Thank you," he breathed. His voice barely rose above the wind, but the emotion in it was unmistakable. I nodded, unable to speak. He adjusted June in his arms and stood, then reached his free hand toward me. "Come on, let us get both of you home." The moment he said the word home, something warm pushed against my ribs, even through the cold. We walked together back toward the house, our steps slow and careful. June clung to Daniel with one arm and to me with the other, refusing to let go of either of us. Each time she shivered, Daniel pulled her closer. Once we reached the porch, Daniel unlocked the door with trembling hands. Warm air washed over us as we stepped inside. He set June gently on the sofa and inspected her hand. "It is a small cut. She will be all right." He looked at me again, his eyes softer now. "But she would not have been without you." I swallowed hard, unable to form an answer. June leaned against my side, sleepy and fragile. "Do not leave again," she murmured. I looked at her tiny fingers wrapped in my scarf, trusting me without question. And for the first time in years, I realized I did not want to leave. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever if I was allowed to stay. The morning after the storm felt strangely gentle, as if the world itself had softened while we slept. The sky outside the windows glowed pale blue, and sunlight bounced off the thick blanket of snow that covered the neighborhood. The brightness seeped into the house, warming the air enough that the lingering cold from the night before felt like nothing more than a fading memory. I woke on the sofa, still wrapped in the heavy wool blanket Daniel had draped over me after making sure June was safe and asleep. For a brief moment, I lay still, listening to the soft hush of the home. There was no panic, no shouting, no icy wind, just the quiet, steady rhythm of a house at peace. It felt unreal. I sat up carefully, my muscles still sore from the frantic rushing through the storm. My chest ached with the memory of June collapsing in the snow, her little hand bleeding, her voice trembling as she whispered that she only wanted to find me. The guilt sat heavy on my heart, but intertwined with it was something else, something warm and terrifying, something that felt like connection, family. I pushed the thought away before it became too real to deny. A moment later, I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel walked into the living room holding 2 mugs of tea. His hair was damp, likely from a quick shower, and he looked tired in a way that softened the sharp edges of his usual reserve. "You are awake," he said quietly. I nodded. "Thank you. For last night." His eyes shifted to the doorway where June slept down the hall. "You saved her." I shook my head. "I only found her. You were the one who brought us home." He hesitated, studying my face with an expression I could not identify. "Sometimes I am not sure you give yourself enough credit." The comment caught me off guard. Praise was something I had not received without conditions for years. I lowered my gaze and wrapped my hands around the warm mug he handed me. He sat in the armchair across from me, his movements slow and thoughtful. The quiet stretched between us, not tense but cautious, like two people trying to navigate the unfamiliar. After a moment, he spoke. "June cried for nearly an hour after I put her to bed. She thought you would disappear again." My throat tightened. "I am sorry. I did not think she would follow me." "It is not your fault." He leaned back, rubbing his forehead with a tired sigh. "She is just a child who has lost more than she understands." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. I wanted to ask about his wife, about the loss that lived quietly in the corners of this home, but I did not dare. He stood and carried his empty mug to the sink, and I followed him into the kitchen, unsure of where I belonged, but unable to sit still. "Let me make breakfast," I said. He hesitated. "You should rest. You barely slept." "Cooking helps me feel steady," I explained softly. "Helps me stay grounded." He looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to allow it. Finally, he nodded. "All right." The simple permission eased something tight in my chest. I moved slowly around the kitchen, still learning where everything was kept. The familiarity of the tasks calmed me. I chopped vegetables, heated a pan, whisked eggs. The rhythmic motions soothed the leftover anxiety buzzing beneath my skin. As I cooked, I felt Daniel's eyes on me occasionally, not with suspicion, but with something quieter. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something he was not ready to name. When breakfast was ready, he set out plates while I placed the food on the table. June padded into the room a few minutes later, her hair wild from sleep. When she saw me, her eyes lit up instantly. "You stayed." Her voice was full of soft relief. I smiled and opened my arms just enough for her to decide if she wanted to come closer. She ran straight into me, wrapping her arms around my waist. The warmth of her little body against mine nearly broke me. I lifted her gently, and she rested her head on my shoulder. I felt Daniel watching us, but I did not look up. The moment felt too sacred to risk misreading. After breakfast, I helped June pack her bag for school. She insisted on carrying the mismatched scarf she had made me and asked if I could walk her to the door. Her hand slipped into mine without hesitation. Daniel watched quietly from the kitchen. When she left for school with him, she turned around 3 times to wave at me. Each wave hit a different part of my heart. After they left, I returned to the living room and began tidying. Not because anyone asked me to, but because it felt right. Real. I folded the blankets, organized the scattered crayons, and wiped crumbs from the table. I was halfway through straightening the bookshelf when I noticed Daniel's laptop open on the coffee table. I should have ignored it. I should have looked away, but the screen glowed with a headline that froze my breath. "Young designer accused of stealing collection." My name was beneath it. My photo, too. A photo from before my life imploded before the scandal that had chased me out of every job, every home, every doorway where I had sought safety. My hands trembled as I reached for the laptop, but before I could touch it, the front door opened. Daniel stepped inside. He froze when he saw me standing near the screen. The moment stretched taut between us. Finally, he exhaled. "I was going to ask you about it, but I guess the timing is terrible now." I swallowed hard, my pulse thundering. "You looked me up." He nodded slowly. "I had to. I have a child. I get that. I really do." But knowing that did not lessen the sting. The screen felt like a spotlight burning into my skin. He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. Is it true? I stared at the headline. At my own face. At the accusation that had followed me through every city, every shelter, every night spent shivering under a bridge. "No," I whispered. My voice cracked. "I did not steal anything. Someone else stole my work, my designs, and they blamed you." He finished softly. I nodded. My fingers tightened around themselves as the old pain resurfaced. Everything I had built disappeared overnight. My reputation, my income, my friends. And then people believed what they read. Even my landlord raised my rent because he assumed I was trouble. Daniel listened quietly, the tension in his shoulders shifting into something else. Not pity. Something more difficult. Something that required belief. When I finally looked up, my voice barely held together. "Do you believe me?" His silence stretched like a blade, and even though I knew his hesitation had more to do with fear than judgment, it still felt like the floor dropping out beneath me. I nodded slowly. Thank you. For your honesty. Then I walked past him, my heart aching, and headed for the guest room to gather my things. I could not stay. Not after that. I did not pack much. There was not much to pack. A pair of worn jeans, a sweater with stretched sleeves, my coat with the broken zipper, the small knitted scarf June had made for me, uneven and imperfect and more precious than anything else I owned. I folded everything carefully, even though my hands were trembling so hard that the fabric kept slipping between my fingers. Each movement felt like a goodbye, carved in slow motion. I could hear my heartbeat more than I could hear the sounds of the house. It pounded loudly in my ears, drowning out the creak of the floorboards and the hum of the heater. The world outside the window was still heavy with snow, untouched and quiet, but inside me everything was shaking. I told myself I was doing the right thing, leaving before I hurt June, leaving before Daniel's hesitations hardened into rejection, leaving before the tiny sliver of hope that had begun blooming inside me grew into something that could be crushed. I zipped my bag and lifted it from the bed. It felt too light, too symbolic, as if the sum of my life had been reduced to barely a handful of items. My throat tightened. I walked toward the doorway, but my footsteps slowed as soon as I reached the hall. I could hear faint noises coming from the kitchen, the clink of glass, the scrape of a chair. Daniel's voice, low and steady, speaking to himself in a way that sounded like someone trying to steady his own confusion. I closed my eyes. I wished I could walk past him without explaining anything. I wished I could vanish quietly and leave nothing behind but the warmth of the soup I had cooked, or the faint indentation on the sofa cushion. But I was not a ghost, and leaving now without saying anything would only deepen the wound in June's tiny heart. So I stepped forward. My steps were soft, but Daniel still turned when he heard them. He froze when he saw me standing in the doorway with the bag in my hand. A long silence expanded between us. He looked at the bag, then at my face. "You are leaving." His voice was not angry, not cold, just hollow. I swallowed. "Yes, I think it is better if I go." "Better for who?" "For you, for June, for everyone." His jaw tightened just slightly. "You think leaving without talking to her first is better? For her?" I flinched. I was going to say goodbye. He stepped toward me, closing some of the distance. "Why are you really leaving because you hesitated? You could not say you believed me." His breath caught. I saw it. For a moment he looked away and the muscles in his jaw shifted. When he turned back, his eyes were sharper, conflicted. "I have a child to protect. I cannot make careless choices." I nodded. "I know. That is why I am doing this for you, for her." I moved past him and reached for my coat near the door, but his hand came up gently, not touching me, just stopping me. "Please do not leave like this." I shook my head. "If I stay, she will think I belong here. She already does." That sank into me with a weight I was not prepared for. I pulled the coat from the hook and slipped it over my shoulders. The broken zipper dangled uselessly, and the cold would cut through me the moment I stepped outside. Daniel watched me with an expression that felt like something unraveling. "Stay for one more day. Please." The plea in his voice made me ache. I forced myself to remain steady. If I stay one more day, it will become 2, then a week, then a month. And then one morning I will wake up and realize I have built my heart around a life that is not mine, and you will look at me and see the mistakes you fear. His brow pulled together in pain. "That is not fair. It is honest." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low. "Nothing has happened between us. Nothing has even started." I exhaled shakily. "That is the problem. You remind me that nothing in my life has ever gone right. And I remind you of what you lost." His eyes widened slightly, the truth of that cutting deeper than either of us intended. I did not want to hurt him. I did not want to say these things. But I could not stay in a home where I was measured against ghosts I could never compete with. He stepped back as if needing to process the words. The room fell into a fragile stillness. Just then, a small sound broke the silence, the soft patter of footsteps. We both turned. June stood in the hallway, her small face pale with confusion. Her eyes drifted between the bag in my hands and the doorway behind me. She whispered, "You are leaving." His little voice cracked like something fragile falling to the floor. My heart twisted painfully. I knelt down, setting the bag aside. "Sweetheart, come here." She rushed forward and threw her arms around my neck. I held her tightly, feeling her tiny frame shaking. "Why do you have to go?" I brushed her hair gently. "Sometimes grown-ups need time to fix the parts of themselves that feel broken. But I do not want you to be broken. You are my friend." My throat tightened. "You are my friend too." She pulled back and reached into her pocket, revealing the small knitted scarf she had made. She pressed it into my palms. "Take it, so you will not be alone." Her generosity, her innocence, her unexpected wisdom, all of it hit me with unbearable force. I hugged her again, my tears slipping silently into her hair. When she finally released me, I stood slowly and lifted the bag. I looked at Daniel one last time. "I am sorry. I have been left before," I whispered. "I cannot survive being left again." He looked at me with a rawness I had never seen in him. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something that could stop me, something that could change everything. But no words came. So I opened the door. The cold burst in, instantly rushing over my skin like icy fingers. I stepped outside. The snow crunched beneath my boots. Behind me, the door clicked softly. It felt like the sound of something breaking. And then I walked into the winter night, not knowing where I was going, only knowing that I could not stay where my heart wanted to belong. The cold followed me for days after I left Daniel's house. Not just the winter cold that seeped through my coat and bit into my skin, but a deeper cold, the kind that settles in the spaces grief creates. I tried to ignore the ache in my chest, the constant echo of June's trembling voice asking why I had to go. Each time her face flashed across my mind, the pain sharpened. But I kept walking, kept moving, kept breathing the way someone does when they have no choice but to survive the next hour, then the next, and the one after that. I found temporary shelter in the back of a downtown women's center, a place with peeling paint and a single heater that groaned more than it worked. But it was a roof. And after sleeping in snowbanks only days before, a roof felt like a luxury. The coordinator, a middle-aged woman named Marie, looked at me with kind eyes and said, "You can stay 3 nights if you help in the storage room." It was not a question. It was an offer. So for 3 days, I sorted boxes of clothing donations, folded blankets, and stacked canned food. The work was mindless, and for a while that was exactly what I needed. Something repetitive. Something that did not require emotion. Something to keep my hands from shaking when I thought of June. On the 4th morning, I woke before dawn and walked through the quiet streets to a thrift shop that had a tiny bulletin posted outside, "Help Wanted." Repairs, light, sewing, flexible hours. I stared at the sign for a long moment. My breath clouded the air in front of me. Sewing. The word tugged at a part of my memory that had been buried under dust and shame. Before the scandal, before the headlines, before people whispered that I was a thief, I used to sew with confidence. I used to create. I pushed the door open. A small bell chimed above my head. The shop owner was an older woman with silver hair tied in a loose bun. She looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" I forced my voice to remain steady. I saw the sign outside. "I can sew." She studied me for a long time, her eyes lingering on my coat, my worn shoes, the exhaustion I could not hide even if I tried. Then she nodded. "Let me see your hands." I hesitated, confused, but offered them. She turned them over gently. Thin fingers, a few calluses, the kind that belong to someone who has spent years working with fabric. Her expression softened. "You start now." Relief settled through me with unexpected warmth. She led me to a small back room filled with boxes of clothes in need of repair. Buttons missing, seams ripped, hems frayed. I took a seat at the old sewing machine, lifted a blouse from the top of the pile, and began to work. My hands remembered more than my mind did. The rhythm returned quickly. Stitch, guide, fold, smooth. As the machine hummed beneath my fingers, Something inside me steadied for the first time since I had left Daniel's house. When I finished the blouse, the owner stepped behind me and lifted it from the table. She inspected the seams, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Better than I expected," she muttered. "There is an extra sandwich in the fridge. Eat before you faint on me." I almost cried at the kindness, but I held the emotion back. I needed this job. I needed to prove something to myself. Over the next few weeks, I worked in that shop every morning. At night, I still stayed at the Women's Center until a volunteer mentioned an affordable room above a bakery on the edge of town. I moved in with nothing but my small bag and the scarf June had made for me. Each morning when I tied it around my neck, I felt a pinch in my chest. I wondered if she was all right. I wondered if she still looked for me at the door. I wondered if Daniel hated me. As winter melted slowly into a timid early spring, the shop owner handed me a small stack of fabric samples one afternoon. "A designer is coming next week," she said. "Local woman. She wants to source repaired textiles for a charity show she is curating." I froze. A charity fashion gala. The kind of event my life used to revolve around. The kind of event that had once felt like a dream I was finally walking into before everything had been taken. I forced a careful breath. "What does she want from us, Repairs?" "Maybe custom pieces." She shrugged. "She likes stories and clothes. You look like someone who has a story or two." I did not know how to respond, so I focused on the work, letting hours pass beneath the steady rhythm of fabric and thread. The next week, the designer arrived. She was tall, with short-cropped hair and a keen gaze that missed nothing. She walked through the shop with practiced steps, lifting garments, examining stitches, asking questions. When she reached my table, she paused. "Who repaired this?" I stood slowly. "I did." Her eyes lifted to mine, sharp with interest. "Same person who did this one." She picked up a linen blouse I had finished the day before. I nodded. She turned the garment inside out, tracing the seams. "Your construction is very clean. Your technique is confident." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "Thank you. Have you worked in fashion before?" I hesitated. The truth sat heavy in my throat. "Yes. But I have had a difficult few years." She set the blouse down and folded her arms. "I see." Then, to my surprise, she smiled slightly. "I could use someone like you for my show." I blinked. "What do you mean, a collaborator?" "Someone who understands how to turn something broken into something beautiful again." Her words sank into me like a slow, blooming warmth. It did not feel like pity. It felt like possibility, like the first breath after being underwater for too long. She continued, "If you want the work, it is yours." I wanted to say yes immediately, but fear held me still. What if someone recognized my name? What if the scandal resurfaced? What if I failed again? But then I remembered June's voice. "You smell like the soup." And I realized I wanted to be someone she could be proud of. Someone who did not run from the past. Someone who chose to rebuild. I lifted my chin and met the designer's eyes. "Yes, I want the work." "Good." She extended her hand. "Welcome back." The words hit me harder than I expected. Welcome back. Back to what I had lost. Back to who I once was. Back to the world I thought I would never touch again. That night, in my tiny rented room above the bakery, I unfolded June's knitted scarf and held it gently in my lap. I ran my fingers along the uneven stitches, and for the first time since I left Daniel's house, I felt something light inside me. Not hope exactly, but the shape of it. A beginning, a way forward, a chance to rewrite the parts of my story I thought were gone forever. The night of the charity gala arrived faster than I expected. The venue glowed with warm golden lights that shimmered through tall windows, casting soft reflections across the polished floors. Guests in elegant dresses and tailored suits drifted through the space, their conversations mixing with gentle music from a string quartet near the stage. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the simple black dress the designer had chosen for her team to wear. It felt surreal to be here again, surrounded by fabric and creativity and applause from people who had no idea how close I had come to disappearing entirely. The designer, whose name was Rowan, placed a hand on my shoulder. "Remember?" she said softly. "They are not here to judge you. They are here to feel something. You know how to do that." Her confidence in me steadied my breath. I nodded and stepped behind the curtain, waiting for the first part of the show to begin. The centerpiece of the collection was a dress Rowan and I had worked on together. It was not extravagant or bold. Instead, it was soft and quiet, made from repurposed fabric that held faint traces of life before it had been discarded. Along the hem, I had stitched tiny hand shapes intertwined, a pattern inspired by a memory I could not let go of. A small hand gripping my coat in the snow, June's hand. As the audience settled into their seats, the host stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone. The show began with a slow progression of pieces that told stories of renewal, resilience, and healing. Each model walked with gentle confidence, letting the garments speak through subtle movement and light. My heart pounded with each passing minute. I had never been this close to a second chance. I wanted to believe I had earned it. Halfway through the program, the host announced the final highlight of the evening. There was something warm in her voice, something almost excited. Before we present our last piece, we have a very special reading. A hush spread through the room. My breath caught when I saw her. A small figure walked onto the stage wearing a soft pink dress embroidered with daisies. Her brown curls bounced with each step. She held a piece of paper in her small hands. My vision blurred instantly. June. She stopped at the microphone, her eyes searching the crowd until they found me. When she saw me standing in the wings, her expression lit up with a soft, relieved smile, as if she had been hoping I would be there. My entire body froze. My heart felt like it had leaped into my throat. She cleared her voice and began reading. "My name is June," she said. "I once had just a daddy. He is very serious and very smart, but sometimes he gets lonely even when he pretends he is not." A few people chuckled softly. June continued. "Then one day we met someone. She had cold hands but a warm heart, and she did not laugh at me when I called her mommy." The room fell completely silent. Not a shuffle, not a breath. I pressed a hand over my mouth as tears filled my eyes. She did not stay long, but she left pieces of herself with us like soup and songs and hugs that felt like home. My chest tightened painfully. My vision blurred. June unfolded the paper and continued reading, her voice trembling with emotion she could not hide. "So, this is my poem. Home is not the walls or the floors or the pillows on my bed. Home is who holds my hand when I am scared. Home is when she sings to me and kisses my sleepy head. Home is where my daddy smiles again. And home is where my mommy is. And maybe that is tonight." The entire audience exhaled as one, a soft collective sound like a heart unfolding. I covered my mouth, shaking. My tears streamed freely now, unashamed and unstoppable. Then I saw movement to the side of the stage. A man stepped into the light, holding a wooden frame in his hands. My breath stopped. Daniel. He walked with careful, deliberate steps, his eyes fixed on me. He wore a suit, one he had clearly dusted off for the occasion, and his expression was a mixture of hope and fear and something deeper. When he reached me, he lifted the frame slightly. Inside it, behind clear glass, was the small knitted scarf I had wrapped around June that snowy night. The scarf was worn and uneven and imperfect, but Daniel had preserved it as if it were priceless. His voice was low, soft enough that it felt meant only for me. I framed the day we met, because that was the day my home started to return. I could not speak. My throat burned with emotion I could barely hold. He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I thought I had lost everything. I thought keeping people out was the only way to protect what was left. But letting you in gave us more." I reached into my pocket slowly. My fingers closed around a folded piece of paper, the one I had carried for months now. I held it out to him. His eyes widened. The note he had left beside my tea. "You are not invisible," I whispered. "You were the first person to see me again. Not the scandal, not the failures. Me." He swallowed hard. "I want to keep seeing you, without fear, without distance, without running away." For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence wrapped around us gently, as if the world knew not to interrupt. Then my eyes drifted to the stage. June stood there watching me with her small hands clasped together and hope shining like a beacon across her face. I felt my chest break open in the softest way. I turned back to Daniel, my voice cracked. I think I would like to come home, if you'll have me. The relief that washed over his face was something I would remember for the rest of my life. Before either of us could say another word, June ran from the stage and flung herself into my arms with a laughter that felt like pure sunlight. I held her tightly, feeling her heartbeat against mine. The room burst into warm applause, not for fashion, not for fame, but for something more rare. A family found, a family chosen, a family rebuilt. Later that night, in the quiet warmth of Daniel's home, I watched June press cookie dough into heart shapes while Daniel stood behind me, his hand resting gently at my back. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla filled the kitchen. The light was golden and soft. And in that moment, I understood something simple and extraordinary. We had not found perfection, but we had found home. Sometimes the family you find is the one that finds you first. Sometimes broken pieces fit together in ways you never expected, and sometimes love is not something you chase. It is something you return to, something that waits for you, something that holds on when everything else lets go. Sometimes when a story ends, it does not really end at all. It lingers like a warm light in a quiet room, the kind that makes you pause before standing up because something in you is still shifting. If this story touched you even in a small way, it is because somewhere in its moments you recognized a truth you already knew, that we are all walking through this life carrying pieces no one sees, yearning for connection, yearning for safety, yearning for a place to finally set our hearts down. Maybe you saw a memory of your own inside this journey, a moment when you needed kindness, or when someone showed up for you in a way that changed everything. Or maybe you remembered the times life felt too heavy, too cold, too unfair, and how a single act of decency helped you breathe again. Stories like this remind us that no matter how complicated the world becomes, the things that matter most are still simple. A warm hand in the dark, a voice saying you are not invisible, a moment of courage when every part of you is tired, a safe place to land after too many storms. And if you felt any of that tonight, then you are exactly where you are meant to be. Because what you just listened to is more than a story. It is a gentle reminder that healing is not a straight line, that love rarely arrives when we expect it, that sometimes the family we find is the one life brings to us quietly, without warning, without fanfare, in the middle of ordinary days. Maybe you have been the one who had to rebuild after loss. Maybe you have been the one who carried guilt or doubt or the weight of something you never deserved. Maybe you have been the one who walked through winter after winter, hoping to feel sunlight again. And if that is true, then I hope this story placed a small ember in your hands, the kind that tells you warmth is still possible, that tomorrow can still be better than yesterday. If you are here, it means you understand what it is like to hold on even when it hurts. It means you understand that tenderness is not weakness, and courage is not always loud. Sometimes it sounds like a whispered promise to keep going. Sometimes it looks like opening the door when everything in you is afraid. Sometimes it is nothing more than choosing to stay present for one more moment. And maybe watching this reminded you that there are still good people in the world, people who try, people who care, people who offer shelter even when they are still learning how to heal themselves. If you felt that even for a heartbeat, then I want to invite you to stay a little longer with us. Because this channel is not just a place for stories. It is a place for hearts that have lived. It is a place for people who believe in second chances, in quiet bravery, in love that grows slowly and patiently. It is a place where you can rest for a while, where you can feel seen, where you do not have to carry everything alone. So if this story touched you, if it made you think of someone you love, if it made you want to call a friend or hug your family a little tighter, then I hope you will consider subscribing. Not out of habit, not because everyone says to, but because you deserve a space filled with gentleness and hope. You deserve stories that honor the battles you have fought, the losses you have carried, and the strength it took to make it this far. And if you choose to stay with us, I promise you will find more moments like this. More reminders that even in a world that moves too fast and forgets too easily, there is still room for grace. There is still room for healing. There is still room for love of every kind. Thank you for spending this time with us, for opening your heart to a story that might stay with you a little longer than you planned. Wherever you are tonight, may you feel warmth, may you feel seen, and may you know that you are never walking alone. Truly.